come to me. Where's the guy? Come on, step out.
All right, don't say hello. Don't let me do it.
Both of you, step out.
Dan, thank you very much for hanging out with me. I've got Dan over here, the camera's over here, I got my laptop over here, so when you're watching this, forgive me if I'm looking this way, because I want to see Dan. I'll look this way if I want to look at you. It's kind of a wonky thing out here in the shop. Sorry about that. We don't have a studio in the shop, per se. But as I was just saying to Dan, I'm out here in the shop today because I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And my computer, in my home office, is printing out a bunch of things on the 3D printer. I've been making stuff like I'm working on this is the parts for a push block, a table saw, and a little rack for the blue guns in class for students put their blue guns on, and little stuff like this little measuring dealie and few things from my wife's craft room and like that. And somebody's going to say, I know it's going to happen, Dan, why aren't you printing guns on your 3D printer? Well, here's the answer. One, California, it's illegal. I'm in California, you can't do that. You can, but it's illegal. So right. I don't suggest you violating the law. We're fighting to get that law to change, but in the meantime, it's illegal. Don't be doing that. The other thing is that I don't need any more guns. I look at guns as tools, and if I did it, it'd just be for the fun of doing it, not because I need a gun, because I don't. So there you go. So no, I'm not printing guns on my 3D printer, but I am printing a whole lot of other stuff, Dan. The technology has arrived. It's sort of like that thing from the old Star Trek TV show when they called it a replicator. They wanted something and it would just make it. Right. It's that kind of stuff. Really kind of cool.
Well, anyway, you've got a whole new company shortly.
Yeah, I'm telling you. Well, you got some stuff going on with ATF you texted me about yesterday. So here we are on New Year's Eve day. I'm in my shop. You're at home. Two old guys talking about the terrible things the ATF's doing. What the heck is the ATF doing?
Well, I heard from a friend yesterday. He asked me, what is it with ATF seizing these 40 millimeter grenades that are chalk rounds and the parachute flares? I said, what are you talking about? I hadn't heard about this. And I said, well, if you find a link to a story about that, send it to me. I'll look at it. And he did. And then I looked at a few things on the internet, and that's when I reached out to you. It seems as though, according to the oldest article I found, this started about 10 years ago, although I hadn't heard about it.
Why are they taking chalk training rounds? And I mean, these things are harmless. I mean, they're not harmless if they hit you directly, but I mean, other than that, they're harmless. What's the point?
Well, here's the thing. Everybody's confused because ATF, prior to whenever they started this, if it's been going on continually for 10 years, I don't know, or if they did it a little bit in 2015 and then there was a lull and now they've started up again, I'm not sure. But prior to whenever they started, the only 40 millimeter rounds or any rounds over, 20 millimeter or larger, that were destructive devices by themselves had to contain high explosives or incendiary or poison gas, not that you run into those. But the definition, I mean, what I'm about to say, I'm not justifying anything that they're doing. I'm not saying I agree with it. What I'm going to do is explain some of these definitions and some of federal law. And then I think we can draw the conclusion as to why ATF's doing this, because they constantly want to, they're anti-gun under the present administration, and they constantly want to broaden their power and do anything that takes guns and ammunition away from law-abiding people. I mean, if you're doing anything illegal with these rounds, there's already a law against it, obviously. As I just said, it's if you're doing anything illegal. So what are they solving here? I'm not sure. But anyway, in some of these forums and whatnot, you see all these terms being thrown around like small arms ammunition. Hey, these are small arms ammunition, or they're not. Then you hear the word explosives. These don't contain explosives. Then you hear destructive device and whatnot. So the bottom line is this: what's the definition of a destructive device? Um, there are several. The only one that would apply here. And before I get into it, the definition of a destructive device is the most convoluted one of all the federal firearm definitions. It's the hardest to teach. And what it says when you read the way Congress wrote it as a paragraph, you have to try to divide it up into, okay, how many actual groups of things are they talking about here? So the first one is any bomb, grenade, rocket, or mine. And even if it's a bomb, grenade, rocket, or mine, which none of those are defined in federal law.
Right.
So when do you cross the line? That's a question. I love the way Congress did that. Use all these terms and then don't define them so we can tell when you've done that. So bomb, grenade, rocket, or mine, and it has to contain either explosive or incendiary or a poison gas. And even then, to qualify as rocket, grenade, or mine, it has to have more than 4 ounces of accelerant in it.
So this is the reason why now California, everything's illegal in California. But if I'm at our place in Arizona, I can go down the street. I can go down to Sholo and I can buy fireworks. I can buy, M80s and whatever. But is that the reason why those are legal and not considered a violation of that? Is because they don't have as much explosive in them?
No, it's a case of what's the intended use.
I see.
Bombs, grenades, rockets, mines, those, and there's another definition we're coming to, but those are weapons intended for, anti-personnel use against humans. Fireworks, there's a federal definition in the Federal Register, and it talks about items that are for producing an audible and visible effect for entertainment, and they're not
Hence the reason.
intended.
Hence the reason firecrackers are fine, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
But by the
Okay.
same token, somebody could go get some firework type mortars and start shooting them, at people. Now you've
Sure.
turned it into a destructive device, for instance. At any rate, I don't think that the bomb, grenade, rocket, or mine is what's going on with these 40 millimeter grenades. One of the other definitions is any missile which contains an explosive or an incendiary and only has to contain more than a 1/4 ounce of an accelerant. So that I think is the one that ATF's attorneys have hung their hat on. Why it took them so long to finally change their mind, or why they didn't see this in the first place, that always puzzles me. I assume these people can read, they have the definitions in front of them. It's what they do for a living, but yet you'll see them be fine with something for decades, and then all of a sudden somebody wakes up one morning and says, oh, wait a minute, here's something we can take action on that we never took action on before. Okay, well, were you stupid then, or are you stupid now? How does that make some sense? So the bottom line, I think what they're hanging their hat on, because they will not publish the letter that I've been able to find explaining themselves, and that was even acknowledged in some of these forums. They're calling these things a missile, which contains an explosive over a 1/4 ounce, and therefore satisfies one definition of a destructive device. So again, I'm not saying I agree, I'm not justifying it. I'm saying I believe that's probably what they're using to justify this. I don't know that anybody's been prosecuted for it. From all I've gathered, they've, one of these deals where they come out, knock on your door. We understand you bought some of these, and then they want to take them. In one guy's case, he admits that the ATF person who took them sympathized with him and said, yeah, I know this is stupid. I don't agree with it. I just have to do it. So
Doesn't surprise me. Obviously, if you hit somebody in the chest up close with a 40 mic, this is problematic for that
it's going to be a
individual.
problem.
That could be a problem. But at the same time, here's my mech grabber, right? I mean, I can make, I don't know, let's consider, I can make shotgun shells all day, right? I've got a 12
Right.
gauge loader. I got a 16 gauge loader. I got, behind me is my progressive. Here's a, you know, single stage or CBS. I can make pistol ammo and rifle ammo all day. I can do a lot more damage with the ammunition I crank out in this shop, if I were a person who had some nefarious evil intent, than I can do with a chalk round out of a 40 mic. That's just really insane. One wonders what was the driving force behind this decision to go out and scoop these up.
I honestly believe this idea was born in chief counsel's office. The attorneys come up with these things, and again, these are people who were appointed by an anti-gun administration. They're, I'm
which
willing to
thankfully is gonna be gone in 20 days.
Exactly. Is it January 20th yet?
Yeah, that's right. Been asking myself that for a month or so.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, it's interesting. I was just yesterday, I watched, for whatever reason, I don't know why, it came up on my options on either YouTube or Rumble, one of the two, I forget. I think it was Rumble. But anyway, The Trace, which is ardently anti-gun, as you know, some time back did a piece on what they call ghost guns, which I absolutely hate that term. It's like assault weapon. I hate that term too, for all the reasons you and I don't need to get into because everybody knows. But anyway, they did it, and they visited Rob Pincus, who obviously is very pro Second Amendment. I've never met Rob, but I understand he's a pretty good guy. But in any case, they met him. He had a 3D printer, and so they printed out a Glock pistol, which, if anybody's ever done it, I've never done it. I have friends who have in Arizona and other states where it's legal, but again, I primarily live in California where it's not, so I've never done that. But there's a lot of fit and finish work you got to do on these things once you print them. You just print something out of a 3D printer. It doesn't mean it's exactly what it's supposed to be. So you're going to do a lot of, sanding and filing and cleaning out and like that, and to get it to work properly. And that's what they discovered. They spent 10 hours on this thing and finally got it to work where it would fire 1 or 2 rounds before it jammed. And then they finally borrowed a slide from somebody else. They had an event for people who are very creative and want to make their own firearms, which I think is marvelous. But in any case, along the way, they talked to somebody from ATF. I did not catch the gentleman's name, but I thought he was actually quite reasonable. And one of the things he pointed out was, and I can tell you, having had people send me pictures of the files, that you can print a 40 mic if you want to. Launcher to go under your AR or whatever. You can print a 37 millimeter or whatever it is flare launcher if you want to. Now, obviously, if you print one of those, depending on the state you're in, I would advise you not to do that. Find out what your local laws are and make sure that federal law is okay with that before you find yourself in prison over it. But you could do it. And so they asked the ATF guy, well, what else? Are they printing anything to launch in these things that would be dangerous? He said, oh, sure. And so he showed him an example of a 3D printable grenade, wherein if you added the accelerant, the explosives, and you set it up properly, and I know nothing about explosives, so don't ask me how to do that, and I wouldn't tell you if I did, so there you go. Apparently you can home make these things if you want to with a 3D printer. And so people will say, let's ban 3D printers. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, I printed all kinds of things for my shop and whatever and like that. I think it's, Rob Pincus made a great statement. He said, freedom isn't safe.
I agree.
And we have to finally come to grips with the fact that freedom isn't safe and acknowledge that, and then let people be free. It's not safe to be free, but it's great to be free. Most people are going to treat their freedom appropriately. Some people are going to do nefarious, horrible things. And you can do that with a knife. You can do it with a gun. You can make a bomb. You can make a knife. You can get in your truck and drive through a group of people. We've just seen that happen over and over again. And so the idea that the silliness of it, and the reason why I bring up the story about the Trace piece and the ATF guy, who they ask about, the Trace guy asked the FBI agent, said, so what do you think about these people making these guns? He said, I think it's great. They're really cool. I think it's great. Yeah, if they're just doing that and they're using them as a hobbyist or to hunt with or whatever, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I thought that was great coming out of an ATF agent. That was marvelous. It was a great example of an ATF agent who gets it. And I didn't catch his name, but I'll have to look and see if I can find it. But I thought that was a great response. The issue is, what are you doing with it? In a world in which, if somebody wishes to do so, whether it's in a home CNC machine. I have a buddy that's got a CNC machine for woodworking. You can buy the smaller ones, you know. I mean, this kind of tech, it's out there. The government's not going to stop people from making stuff that's going to hurt other people. They're just not. You can print a gun, you can make one out of a CNC machine, you can make a bomb, you've always been able to make bombs. People have been making pipe bombs for years. Sometimes they get stupid and blow themselves up. What are they going to do? Go down to the hardware store and start banning pipe?
Well,
Doesn't make any sense.
It's interesting. You use several examples of what you can do. You can do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I just saw one of ATF's news briefs. Every Friday, if you subscribe to their website, you get 25 different emails showing in each one of their field divisions who they indicted, who got convicted, whatever they're doing in their major cases. And I monitor that stuff because occasionally you get one that is helpful to know about. And one just came out a few days ago. I was a couple of weeks behind due to the holiday. I believe it was in Baltimore. There's a company called Lethal Eye, or doing business as Lethal Eye. And among other things, they make a muzzle brake. And it says that this company was convicted and sentenced to 3 years. I guess the president of the company, I'm not sure, it didn't name, as I recall. But in addition to other things, they make this muzzle brake, and it said in the narrative that the muzzle brake, along with other items that the company makes and items they don't make that can be found elsewhere, you could put together a silencer. So they busted them for making silencers. And this whole concept, and the point is what you could do. When did what you can do become illegal?
It's like there was a movie, I think, with Tom Cruise or something where they arrested you because they could tell that in the future you were going to do X, so they arrested you now. It's one of those, right?
Right.
This is the nonsense of the whole thing. When you make that arrest, you arrest that guy, that's not only is it not a crime, and even if it is a crime, it's a victimless crime. So what are they making a big deal out of it for?
I agree.
In this, I could have, first of all, with just the guns I own, or just the guns my friends own. Most of my friends hunt, shoot, load ammo up for their own. Most of my friends are like that. Well, actually, as you know, most of my friends are former retired cops, but nevertheless, right? These guys could all go berserk and hurt a lot of people, but they're not going berserk and hurting anybody.
Right.
And so you say to yourself, well, gee, should we make it illegal to go berserk and hurt people, or should we make the things they have in their house illegal? Because you never know, they could go berserk sometime. Well, when the overwhelming majority of people in this country who own firearms never go berserk, and when
they're going to have a knee-jerk reaction,
and oftentimes the ones that go berserk are using legal items to do it. How many of these active shooters have we seen that got the gun legally, or that, whatever, and they went batty? They didn't make a bomb. They didn't need one. Many of them.
How many drivers of cars have gone berserk and used the car the same way?
Oh my gosh, many more than have used a gun. How many have gone? I mean, and then you take the guns away, and what do? You get people doing mass stabbings like they do in London or in England. Or now they're going to take all the pointy knives away. You can't have a point. Then pretty soon they'll be taking away the pointy pencils and the pointy stick, and you won't be able to write anything because your pencil. You get arrested because your pencil is too sharp. You sharpened it just a little too much. You need to dull that thing down a little bit. This kind of stuff is absurd. I mean, do you see this? I guess my question is, every freedom-loving American at this point, I think, is counting down the days and hours until the Biden-Harris administration becomes part of the dustbin of history. How much do you expect this to change once the turnover has happened? I mean, I have a feeling that Trump is going to sign a bazillion executive orders the first day, but I don't know what they're going to be about. So
the way I hope it changes is I hope the president, the real president, when he takes office, appoints someone as the director of ATF to turn all of this around. I hope that new director operates with complete transparency and operates from the standpoint of supporting the industry rather than persecuting it. I mean, in light of that wish for transparency, there's a couple of things I want to let your listeners know. Number one, I'm sure everybody's aware that any firearm over 50 caliber, the definition of a destructive device includes those too. So if you have a 51 caliber or larger firearm, that's a destructive device, with the exception that everybody does know about, but there's another one that they may not know about. The exception that they probably know about is it exempts sporting shotguns, right?
Yeah.
So, and the only two models of shotgun that have ever been deemed by ATF to be non-sporting are the Street Sweeper and the USAS 12. And that's another whole conversation. I don't need to go there. But other than those two, any shotgun you have is still considered sporting, and it's not a DD. Now, the exemption that your listeners may not know about is the exemption for rifles over 50 caliber. Now, that exemption for shotguns has to be made by the Attorney General, the highest law enforcement officer in the United States. Only the Attorney General, and it says right in Title 26, the National Firearms Act, if you look at the end of the definition for destructive devices, one of the 7 exemptions, things that are exempt that are not destructive devices, is that sporting shotgun as determined by the Attorney General. The last one, the 7th one of those exemptions, says any rifle over 50 caliber deemed to be for sporting purposes by the owner, the guy who owns the rifle. Nobody higher than that is required to chime in on it. So the reason I bring that up, number one, you can build a 20 millimeter, whatever, rifle over 50 caliber, as long as you, being the owner, say, hey, this is for sporting purposes, and it is not a destructive device. And along those lines, let's look back at this 40 millimeter stuff. Let's say somebody puts together an M79 grenade launcher, or puts an M203 type, or builds an M203 on their AR type rifle. That is, of course, over 50 caliber, and ATF's going to immediately jump to, hey, destructive device, because it's over 50 caliber. Well, if it has a shoulder stock and it has a rifled bore, those are the only 2 elements in the definition of a rifle. So it is a rifle. And if you deem it to be sporting, then it is not a destructive device. Now, generally, the barrel on this thing is going to be less than 16 inches. We all know that the barrel on a rifle has to be 16 inches. So you make it 16 inches long and you deem it to be sporting, it is not a destructive device.
Muzzle loading rifles, many of them are not, I don't know about many, but there are examples of those that are greater than 50 caliber, and people
Right.
use them for deer hunting or whatever. So that would fall into the same
No.
category. But I suspect that because they're muzzle loading, ATF's probably not going to have a hassle with them anyway. Or is that why they're okay?
Well, the 4 definitions of an antique, which are exempt from the Gun Control Act, anything that uses an antique ignition system like cap lock, flintlock, matchlock, wheel lock, or anything that is a muzzleloader that does not incorporate the frame or receiver of a firearm. So you're hawking 50 caliber rifles and things like that, your old brown vest type muskets. No part of that is considered to be a frame receiver by ATF. And since it's a muzzleloader and because it has an antique ignition system, those are exempt from the Gun Control Act 2 different ways, no matter what the diameter of the bore is. Plus, there's a definition of an antique under the NFA also, which exempts certain kinds of artillery. It's different than the definition of an antique under the Gun Control Act. So let's say you had a cannon, 3-inch diameter bore cannon. That item can be exempt from the NFA if it is A, made before 1899, and B, uses a cartridge not commercially available in the US, or made before 1899 and it's a muzzleloader. So a lot of your
Okay,
old
so
artillery.
hold it, just stop right there.
Okay.
In the United States, you can own a cannon
You can. A shootable cannon.
because Slow Joe repeatedly made the asinine statement that nobody can own a cannon in the United States.
Joe Biden has no idea what he's talking about.
Well, Joe Biden has no idea what his name is or what planet he's on or who he's standing next to most of the time. He thinks his wife is his sister. So, but nevertheless, I just wanted to point out to the world, yes, if you're in the United States, you can own a cannon. And oh, by the way, during the fight for this country and many times after that, there were many people called privateers, which were essentially pirates, and they were private people who owned seagoing vessels with many, many, many cannon on them.
Yes, they did.
There you go. Sorry.
Well,
Had to jump in
here's
there and
another
say
one for
that.
you. This will come as even more of a shock. There are machine guns you can own, shootable live machine guns that are not subject to the NFA. Did you know that?
I did not know that. See, this
The
is
other-
okay. Just so you know what this episode is. Dan texts me yesterday. We're going to talk about this one little issue with the stupid 40 mic thing. And then we're just going to talk about whatever we're going to talk about for a while. So get over it. Hopefully you find this interesting. So there are machine guns you can have and fire that are not part of the NFA. Okay, help me out. What are those?
And that is covered. They are covered by the antique definition to the NFA. So keep in mind, something under the NFA, there are 5 groups of firearms under the NFA: machine guns, destructive devices, silencers, any other weapons, and short-barreled rifles and shotguns. So you have any one of those 5, but it's exempt from the NFA if it satisfies one of the 2 definitions of an antique as defined by the NFA. And again, those 2 definitions are made pre-1899 and uses a cartridge not available in commercial trade. So picture the Colt 1895 potato digger, the pre-World War I belt-fed machine gun, just as an example.
Yeah.
It's the one I always use because it's one people are familiar with. And it's in 6mm Lee Navy cartridge. That's something.
Try finding that someplace.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
the cartridge during the Spanish-American War. Well, there are people out there who own those, made pre-1899, and you can tell by the serial number what year this one left the factory, and it's in a cartridge that is not commercially available. Nobody makes 6mm Lee Navy. So you could have a garage full of that ammunition because you found it not in commercial trade. You reloaded it yourself, you bought it from a private owner, what have you, and you can shoot this thing until you're blue in the face. You own it. You don't have to register it. It's not illegal. It's not subject to the NFA. And there are others, old Maxims in calibers that are no longer available commercially, et cetera. So anyway, that's part of that transparency that I hope the new director of ATF starts imparting to the public. I know if I were to get that job, that would be one of my first order of businesses. I want all.
You know what I would
enforcement
really
in the
like to
public
see is
to know
is-
these things.
yeah, I agree. But I think I would also like to see ATF focus on people who have ill intent.
Oh, right. They need to focus
Rather
on
than
violent
going
crime.
after the law-abiding, honest, hard-working citizen who doesn't have any intention of doing anything horrible or harming anyone, and making criminals out of them. And like, I'll never forget the guy who got arrested and put in prison for printing a picture of a lightning link on a card. I mean, come on now. What was the
Irvin.
intent there? There was no intent to do harm. It didn't even function. So what is the point? And yet they went after this guy with a vengeance. Is he still in the clink?
Yes, he is. That was one of those cases where someone was convicted because of what you could do. I was a retained witness on that case, and the attorney said, "Hey, the trial's going so well, I'm not going to put you on the stand." And I didn't
Oops.
end up getting to testify. And well, as it turned out, the jury wasn't leaning as far toward acquittal as he thought, and they convicted the man, and he's sitting in prison. But that was my reaction. Since when is it illegal to print things, considering the First Amendment, freedom of the press? And number 2, since when is it illegal because of what somebody could do with this thing? If you cut one out, now you're in possession of a lightning link, you're busted. But until you cut one out, it's a picture.
I will be interested to see and have you back again after, well, you'll come back long before then. But I mean, after 6 months of the Trump administration, it'll be interesting to see how ATF is approaching this crap. Things at ATF are not going to change immediately, are they? I mean, how long does it take for things to start changing when you get a new administration?
That depends on who becomes the new director. There are things that can be done when that person walks in the door the first day. There are things that are going to require the agreement with the Department of Justice, whoever the Attorney General is, and there are things that are going to require action by Congress. There are things that are going to require changes to be made in the Federal Register. It depends on, what level the change you're looking for. But there will be quite a bit. The director on the first day can say, look, I don't want to see another prosecution for braces because they're not stocks, forced reset triggers because they're not machine guns, solvent traps because they're not silencers, etc. And the next person I see indicting a case like that is going to be, held to answer for it. You can put a stop to a lot of things on day one, and hopefully the new director does all that.
Which brings up an interesting question because the current director, I think, has resigned. I thought this morning.
He did.
Which leaves them directorless, so to speak. And that I would assume, again, I'm not a political expert. I assume that whoever is appointed as director by the president needs to be confirmed by the Senate, probably. And if that's the case, I mean, how long can the agency operate directorless? Does the person who the president picks while they're waiting for Senate approval, do they kind of come in as the interim director to mind the store? I mean, how does that work?
Well, there are half a dozen, give or take, deputy directors and assistant deputy directors, the guy in charge of all the agents on the East Coast and the ones on the West Coast, and the one who's in charge of all the industry operations investigators. That's the regulatory side of the house. So I'm sure the number two person can. I mean, ATF has gone without a director for years and years. They had acting directors, and there's still going to be a senior person to fill the gap.
Okay, so this is inside baseball, and you were there a long time, so I don't know. But Trump becomes president. He's got in mind who he wants to become director of ATF. And I like I said, I don't know whether that person has to be approved by Congress or not, but I assume that the Senate has to approve them. And so this person is not official yet. Does the president, I assume he does, have the authority to say, okay, you're the number two dude and you would be in charge of the ATF now. I want to see you in my office tomorrow morning at 9. We're going to have a conversation and we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting. And I'm going to explain to you what your agency will do and will not do while you're there. Is that something the president has the power to do?
Sure, of course. I mean, every agency serves at the pleasure of the president. He assigns who's going to be the director, and he gets to tell them the way he wants things to be done.
And do they push back, or do they just go with whatever the president says?
Well, I think a certain amount of pushback is expected. I mean, the president doesn't want someone with no spine, I would think. He wants someone who's going to say, well, sir, did you consider this? We need to be sure that that doesn't happen and help him think through some things. But I think at some point, if you push back too much, you're subject to being replaced. And depending on what it is the president wants you to do, at some point, there are some things that Dettelbach should have pushed back on so strongly that either Biden would have backed off of it or Dettelbach should have resigned a long time ago because there was.
Or Biden could have fired him, right?
Because there were a lot of things being done in this administration by ATF. For instance, all of a sudden, if you sell one gun, now you're dealing without a license. ATF didn't just come up with that on their own. I'm sure that came from the anti-gun administration. And when it did, I think there should have been some pushback. And, when you change precedents like that, and it's a decision that's not supported by federal law, you're going to have trouble.
Yeah. Well, let's get so just from a point of reality, what can be done and what can't. You and I live in this world, this workplace is called reality. I mean, I would love to be able to say that the NFA could just be abolished by Trump, that the ATF could be trimmed down or abolished by Trump, given the misbehavior of the FBI. As much as I used to look up to them in a lot of ways, I wonder if maybe they shouldn't be restructured or abolished by Trump. But in reality, I don't think the president has the ability to do any of that. I don't think, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to me, it seems to me like that in order to defund ATF, you need the House of Representatives to do that. Or in order to do away with ATF, the Congress has to do that. Does the president even have this sort of sweeping power to shut down federal agencies, sell the building, and say the heck with it, that's not around anymore?
I don't think the president has the ability to stop the NFA by himself. That would be, it was enacted by Congress. It would probably have to be taken apart by Congress.
I would think so. Yeah,
But
I would think so. So I think the expectation, you see it in social media a lot of times, is that this should be done away with and Trump's going to do away with this. Well, I agree that certain things should be done away with, the NFA being one of them, as you know.
well, there are things that are not enforced, even though they are illegal. For instance, marijuana is illegal. It's against federal law.
Federally, yeah.
Having said that, how many thousands of stores are in the United States that have big signs out front? We exist to sell marijuana. It's for sale right now. Come in and buy it. And not
60% of which are probably in San Diego, California, or
could be.
wherever. Right.
Have you ever heard of one of them being busted by the feds, though?
No. And the reason for they don't get busted by California is because California likes the tax money. It's all follow the money. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of things but the reason why I asked the question is because you get the seesaw, right? You get the Biden administration who goes, enforce all of this. And then you get the next administration's slow your roll. Just back up there, Tony. Step back a little bit. We're not enforcing any of that. And then, of course, the next administration goes, enforce all that. And the poor citizens of this country have to live under that crap where they don't know, and depending on who's president and who ends up leading Congress in one capacity or another, laws are enforced or they're not. And so you end up or they're enforced in such a high degree that even questionable things, you end up in court forever. The forced reset trigger, for example, which arguably, as you know, you've explained it to me, that's how I know, does not fit the description of a machine gun. And yet, how much money did they spend? And I'm not asking for an answer to that. It's a rhetorical question. How much money did they spend in court fighting over that? When if it had been a different administration, perhaps they wouldn't have had to. So this back and forth thing it's painful for the citizen and companies, but at the same time, I think it's absurd. There's just so much power imbued in the occupant of the Oval Office to torture people by virtue of the administrative state, that to some degree this has got to be stopped. I mean, I don't know how.
Well, admittedly, I mention this all the time in our seminars. It's a cat and mouse game. The government being the cat, the gun public or the gun industry being the mouse. The cat sets the rules. The mouse finds a way to bring their toes right up to the line. And when they find a way to get that close to the line and the cat doesn't like it, what the cat has to do is make a new law if they don't like it, not just pretend that the line's actually behind you and you've already crossed it. But that's what ATF's been doing for quite some time. On some issues for 50 years, like on the issue of firearm frames and receivers, that went on for 50 years and it's still going on.
It's still going on.
For Supreme Court to give their final decision.
Which is an interesting thing when we get back to technology, and I mean, we've been on quite a long time. I apologize for burning up so much of your time on New Year's Eve day, brother. You
It's
should
all
be
good. It's always a pleasure, Joel.
you should be outside grilling and drinking a beer or something. For that matter, so should I. Okay, but that's okay.
There's
If
plenty of
you,
time for that.
oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I intend to grill some burgers and drink a beer or two or three. So there you go. Um, it would seem to me, and to some degree, I think the technology wise, it started with Cody Wilson and his printer, the first, what was it, the Liberator or whatever, they created
Right.
the first totally 3D printed gun. I think it used a nail you bought at the hardware store as a firing pin. And of course, he got in Dutch. They went after him. They couldn't get him for that. The files, they tried to restrict the files, and the Supreme Court went, no, that's freedom of speech. They finally got him for something else, sexual harassment or something. He hired a hooker that was underage or whatever, I think. I don't remember. And if I'm wrong about that, Cody Wilson, and you're watching this, I apologize. I'm not trying to, tar and feather you here. But the point is that I think was the genesis of this ability to take the ability to make firearms at home and kind of juice it up on steroids. Now you've got all this technology. You've got, like I said, CNC machines. You take a block of aluminum and put it in there, and out comes a lower or whatever. You've got 3D printers where you have just spools of filament, and you can, if you got the file, you can print the receiver of a gun or pretty much all the parts other than the metal ones to make a fully functional semi-automatic firearm. It takes a lot of tweaking, a lot of work and like that, but it can be done. And so knowing that, along with what we call the buy build kits, I think we've talked about those, and the 80% lowers, even though they're not really 80%, it's kind of a dumb name. There's so much of that out there. It just strikes me that gun control, from the standpoint of the government's ability to actually control firearms, particularly in this country, is dead and has been dead. And that there's no way that the government can stop people who want to make a gun from making a gun in 2025. I don't think they could have stopped him to do it in 2024. And so even in California, where it's illegal for me to print a gun, which I won't do because I don't go around breaking laws anyway, first of all. Secondly, I don't need a gun, as I said. And thirdly, I'm so public, it would be very, very foolish for me to start breaking laws. But that doesn't mean that the guy next door hasn't done it, or that 6 people on my street haven't done it, or that 500 people or 500, 1,000 people in the state haven't already done it. And nobody would ever know they did it unless they told them, because you can do it at home. I mean,
But the way the law works is if you do it and you get caught, you go to jail.
Right.
So,
but the point is that most people are not going to get caught. And so my point is that even if the government said, no more guns, we're going to try to take all the guns, A, that's impossible because they'll never find them all. And B, they're not going to prevent people from making them, particularly criminals or whatever, if they want to make them. So if that sense, if the idea of gun control is to control access to firearms, use of firearms, ownership of firearms, possession of firearms, that's dead.
well, it's telling that Congress never made a law against private citizens from making their own gun. I mean, anybody who is not prohibited from purchasing a gun, okay, we know that there are 9 categories of people who cannot go in a store and buy a gun. Felon through, renounced your citizenship, all those groups. If you're not in one of those groups and you can go buy a gun, you can, by the same token, sit at home and make your own gun, as long as it's not an NFA firearm and as long as it doesn't violate the Undetectable Firearms Act. In other words, it can't be a gun that can pass through a magnetometer at an airport.
Yeah, it's got to have some metal in it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you can make your own gun, and Congress never made a law against that. So one of the biggest words I hate in firearm issues, in Second Amendment issues, is loophole. loophole. Well, that's a loophole. Well, that just means that's something that's legal, but you don't like it. Whoever calls it a loophole, they just don't like that it's legal. Well, too bad. It is legal. And if you don't like it, then make a law against it. And so to that end, a lot of states have um, made state laws that say, hey, in this state, you can't make your own gun without putting a
Not
serial.
very many, by the way. I think there's 8 or 9 out of
Too
the
many,
50. There's
but
too
still,
many. If there's one, it's too many. But the point is, the majority of the United States, you can make your own gun if you want to, as long as you're not prohibited from owning one.
correct,
You can make it. No serial number required. You don't have to notify the government, right?
correct.
And Congress doesn't bring this up.
Hey, one last thing, not to change the subject, but before we totally run out of time, there's one last thing. I just remembered what it was on this whole destructive device thing I'd like to
Oh
tell your
yeah, please.
listeners. ATF came out with a ruling, and it's in the Federal Register. It's ruling, if I recall the number, 95-1. So it was the first one they came out with, obviously, in 1995. Been out for a long time. It says that if you own a flare launcher, in other words, a smooth bore, doesn't matter what size, 37 millimeter, 40 millimeter, because smooth bore versus rifle is the difference in ATF's
Ah,
opinion, whether it's a flare launcher or a DD. So if you have a smooth bore, so it's a flare launcher, it's legal, but you have anti-personnel ammunition in that caliber in your possession, that makes your flare launcher now a grenade launcher, a DD, a federal
wow.
felony. So anti-personnel ammunition includes anti-riot stuff, bean bags, rubber bullets, wooden batons. It's like a chunk of a baseball bat that shoots out and knocks somebody off their feet. If you have any of that caliber ammo and a smooth bore that it fits, you're in possession of an unregistered DD, according to ATF. I am not agreeing with it. I'm not justifying it. I'm letting everybody know in full transparency that if you have that, you either want to register it or you want to divest yourself of the ammo or what have you to avoid that trouble.
Okay, and so let's make a point about this. I Let's say, for example, I have one of those, and I have that ammo, and I say, okay, I'm going to take that ammo and I'm going to put it in a storage unit. I still am in constructive possession of the 2 items, am I not?
As long as, yes, as long as you still have access to it, because that storage unit, it's rented in your name. You have the keys to the
I have the
padlock.
key, right? Or the combination or whatever. So the reason why I want to bring that up is because I know that somebody's going to go, oh, well, I'll just put it at the office. No, if you
No.
have constructive possession, if you have control of both items, that's constructive possession. You're still in the doghouse. So
What you would have to do is put that in somebody else's control that you don't have keys to their house and you can't just go get it when you want it. So you cousin, brother-in-law, neighbor, whatever, if it were to be found out in an investigation that, hey, you let them put it in their garage, but the understanding was you could show up at a moment's notice and get it if you want it because it's yours. And as a matter of fact, you have keys to that person's house, you're still in constructive possession. So be careful with that. Uh, Trying to get around the law usually doesn't work and you end up in trouble.
and there you have it. Dan, it was just if I was going to do an interview with somebody on the last stinking day of 2024, you're it.
Thank you, Joel.
I'm glad it was you. I'm from the other end of the country. I mean, you're in Florida. Are you in Florida today?
I
Are you
am.
home? Yeah. Okay. Well, you're in Florida. I'm in San Diego. I mean, we couldn't get much farther apart and stay within the United States unless one of us was out to sea or something, and I'm too
Right.
old for that crap. So there you go.
Well,
Hey,
it's been
thank
a
you,
pleasure,
brother.
Joel, as always. And thank you. I wish you and all of your listeners a fantastic 2025. And for that matter, the next 4 years. I can't wait to see the great things that President Trump's going to do for us.
I agree. I'm hoping maybe we'll have a 4 years of Trump and 8 years of JD Vance, and let's get DeSantis in there, and let's just keep the ball rolling and keep these lunatics out of the White House as
That would be
best we
great.
can. That would be great. Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Thank you.